Hi, everyone. This is a video lecture about strategic planning. It's for the use of my students in graduate and undergraduate courses on strategic management. I'm Kurt Roney, Professor of Strategic Management and International Business at the University of Mount Olive's Tillman School of Business. In this lecture, I'll go over a sequence of steps in the strategic planning process. I'll be using PowerPoint slides that were developed by my students who conducted strategic assessments of several companies in recent years. This review should give you a good idea of what is involved in the strategic planning process and the work that you must do to conduct a strategic assessment of a company in one of my courses. However, it's important to acknowledge that actual strategic planning methods are unique to individual companies and their specific business conditions. In fact, strategic management methodology includes many more techniques than those that are discussed in this lecture. But after viewing this video, you should have a pretty good idea of strategic planning's scope and methods. So now, let's get started. And to get started, I will have to bring up some PowerPoint slides. And there they are. That took a while. So this is an outline that summarizes very succinctly the elements of a strategic plan. And you can see that there are 6 sections. An overview of the corporate background, including a summary of products and services, turning points in the company's history, not the entire history, but changes that occurred to make the company what it is and to explain how it became what it is today from what it was in the beginning. Another item that does not have to be changed very often is a summary of the company's mission. And the purpose of that item is to serve as a sort of rudder on a ship to make sure that the frame of reference in the strategic plan is consistent with the basic assumptions of why the company exists. And for purposes of my current course in strategic management, there are 3 possible cases that can be chosen from, and they are in the back of our textbook. And those cases are summaries of Under Armour, Tesla, and Netflix. In other courses, other cases will be involved and available. The second section of the plan is the first part where we have to do some research and some basic fact gathering. And it's about the external environment. What are the markets that the company serves? There very well may be individual countries, but they also might be population groups of people who have something in common. For instance, they may be hospital patients, or they may be sports enthusiasts. But we need to identify what the markets that the company serves are. And we need to focus on countries because we're going to be doing some economic assessment of individual countries where the company either is engaged or potentially could be engaged. And so we'll gather some economic trends using either of two excellent sources, the International Monetary Fund or the US Federal Reserve. FRED stands for Federal Reserve Economic Database. When we get into some illustrations, I'll explain where to find those sources. Something else we need to do is assess the industry or industries that our business or businesses are located in. And we have some tools to do that. They're listed here on this outline, but I won't go into them now since I'm going to go into them in detail later. And finally, an assessment of markets, that is the sources of demand for the products and services that our firm either offers or wants to offer. So we may get some more information from the International Monetary Fund's database or gather information about sales trends for the products or services that our firm offers or in which we are interested. The third section is about the firm's capabilities. And to look at the firm's capabilities, we need to do a financial analysis and take a look at the firm's functional capabilities, its strengths and weaknesses. Having gathered that information, section 4 asks us to put it all together, to rationalize our external environment and internal capabilities. And we have some matrices that we can use for that purpose. The strategic situation matrix, the multi-factor matrix, the directional policy matrix, and I'll be going over those and some others. Next, we need to identify standards for success, goals. What are our financial objectives? What are our other goals for performance other than financial? So perhaps we have an objective to achieve a certain market share or to be a technology leader or a leader in one particular market segment, perhaps one geographic market, and so forth. So standards for success certainly include financial measures, but they are not limited to financial measures, and they can include qualitative measures as well. And finally, we need to answer the question, how are we going to accomplish or achieve those goals? And we're going to find out that there are certain options for doing that. You can see that one of them is divided into 4 options, which we will discuss. There is a wonderful matrix, the Ansoff matrix, that will help us choose from alternatives, and some other matrices that are not listed on this outline just because there's not enough room. But finally, strategy must be broken down into and represented as specific action to be taken by specific managers over specific periods of time. So strategic action programs and projects have accountability assignments, who's responsible, what exactly is expected in terms of objectives and costs and benefits, if you will, and a time frame, the period of time during which this project or program will be conducted, or at least monitored as part of the strategic planning process. So that's it. There's a lot to it, isn't there? I will be drinking coffee as we go through this video because I've been doing a lot of lecturing lately and I have a pretty raw throat. So here's the first item on our list, and it's a discussion of mission. One way to characterize the mission of a company is to, and the definition, a simple definition for a mission is the economic function that a firm undertakes to perform for society. That's worth remembering. It's the economic function that a firm undertakes to perform for a society. And it's interesting to just think about that for a minute, because the economic function that firms perform in different societies are themselves quite different. The mission of firms in China isn't quite the same as the mission of firms in the United States. Some economists will tell you that the purpose of a firm is to make a profit. And yet in the Soviet Union for quite a while, and perhaps even today, and China, firms' purposes certainly were not to make profits, but their purposes were to provide the economic functions that are required to sustain a society. And so the decision or the definition that I've chosen doesn't recognize the profit motive per se. Certainly, the firm that performs the mission most proficiently is most likely to generate a favorable profit if profit is available in that political system, which it usually is. When we get down to the nuts and bolts of a firm's mission, what does it involve? And a management theorist in England named Derek Abel wrote a couple of books, actually, and he proposed that the framework of a corporation can be divided into three elements. And when you have those, you've pretty well defined what the purpose of the firm is. So the first question we have to answer is just what segment of society does the firm undertake to serve? And although that seems like a simple question, it turns out sometimes not to be so simple. I don't have time to give you all the illustrations that I wish I could, but I can tell you that sometimes management has an idea of the kind of customers that it thinks it's serving or wants to serve, but it turns out that the firm is serving a different segment of society than management really has in mind. So it's important to nail that down. Second, in that market segment, where do we find unsatisfied needs? Now, there are a couple of types of unsatisfied needs. Steve Jobs realized that you and I wanted mobile music, even though we didn't realize it. And so Apple developed the iPod and the iStore, and the rest is history. We got mobile music. That was a brand new need and a brand new mission for Apple. Very often, and most often, industries serve certain needs of their markets, but there are flaws in the way they do it. And when management does its strategic planning, it identifies that those flaws exist either in its own work or the work that is done by its competitors. And they decide that there's an unsatisfied need, that need can be met better. And that's where we often find the unmet needs in strategic planning. It's the part of the industry's function that isn't being met or performed adequately. Once we've got that identified, there's a third question, and this is what really makes uh, mature, practiced managers humble. And it's to ask the question, just where does your company find the distinctive competence to meet those unmet needs? And it's very difficult often to answer that question. Yet that's what has to be done. Is it in technology? Is it the way we serve our customers, which becomes kind of difficult because it's hard to be objective? Is it the scope of products that we offer? But just where do we have to have distinctive competence? Is it research and development? Is it low-cost manufacturing and so forth? So where do we find the distinctive competence? When you can answer these three questions, you can certainly describe your firm's mission. So this takes us then to economic trends. You need to develop economic trends in the major countries, not all of them. One of my teams recently worked on PepsiCo. PepsiCo is in more than 70 countries. You don't have time enough to analyze 70 countries, but there are a few big ones. China, the United States. You can also look at the totality of Europe. Total statistics for Europe are available, so as they are for associations and trading blocs in South America and Eastern Europe and so forth. So sometimes we can get by looking at collections of countries rather than just individual ones. But when we're talking about big ones, China, US, India, and the countries that might be particularly interesting just because there's something special about them. Mexico is our neighbor to the south. We have a lot of trade with Mexico. So maybe we'll want to look at Mexico individually. PepsiCo certainly does, because PepsiCo does a lot of business in Mexico. So what kind of economic trends will we be looking at? And you can see them listed here. GDP using purchasing power parity, both in the aggregate and per capita. Purchasing power parity is an adjustment of local currency, and also local currency translated into US dollars using banks' exchange rates. In both of those cases, you can get misleading information, because either form of information won't necessarily either be comparable to other countries or tell you what amount of goods and services a unit of that currency can purchase. But when we adjust the currency for purchasing power, we can compare currencies to each other. And more importantly, we can measure economies and compare economies to each other. Other data that we'll collect and that you need to collect are data about inflation, employment, and currency exchange rates. And there are two great sources to get this information. I've mentioned them already. The US Federal Reserve Economic Database. You can just use Google. You don't even need the website, but just on your Google search window, type in all capitals FRED, and you will get a home page when you click on it. And then you'll find an opportunity to select data. Do that, and from there on, it won't be long before you're presented with an opportunity to search for particular economic variables. Fred is very user-friendly after you get used to it, but it does take a while to get used to it. The same is true of the IMF website. And there you need a web address, and it's on the screen for you. When you go to the home page of the IMF, you probably will not see what I saw yesterday, because IMF constantly changes that home page, and it drives me nuts. Every time I try, if I were to make a video, for instance, and show people how to use the IMF website, when folks look at the video, they don't see the same website. They don't see the same homepage, because I guess the folks at the IMF want to be creative. Nevertheless, there's always a constant menu, and what you want to do is get into the IMF database, get the most recent one. And if you are my student, then you, pardon me, I'm going to have to fix something here on my screen. There we go. If you're my student, I'll be glad to help you use the IMF database. But it's also, once you get used to it, very user-friendly. The output is in Excel format, so you can copy the results from the output right into your own Excel table, and you're ready to go with whatever work you want to do on those data. Just about every country in the world is included in that database, and the economic data go from way back into 1980 all the way through a forecast for 2025. So, just about every variable, including population, when we get into market analysis, is available on that database. It's just a treasure trove for business analysts. Okay, so here are some examples of how folks in my classes have used these data. You can see that this is a graph that compares the United States, the European Union, and China. And as you can see, that gray line is China, and it sort of overtook the US in 2013 and the European Union in 2014. And the gap between China's economy and ours is widening, and that's because its economy is growing faster, especially now that we've suffered from the coronavirus, the pandemic. Here are the, oh, by the way, notice that these are data in purchasing power parity. If we had done these data in local currency adjusted for US exchange rates, the US economy would appear to be larger than China's, but it isn't. China's is larger than the US economy because there are more goods and services, physical goods and services can be purchased there than here. And that's what this graph reflects. Here is the same information for India, Russia, and Mexico. And we see something kind of interesting, and that's the blue line, isn't it? I often tell my students that China is the growth market of the present, and India is the growth market of the future. India has a variety of political problems. Its premier, its president, Mr. Modi, is making great strides to develop the country and streamline some of its very cumbersome, complex regulatory regulations and procedures. Nevertheless, each of the states in India is much more independent than the states in the US, for instance. There's a lot of corruption and a lot of graft in India's politics. So whatever the reason, and there are many, India's economy is, if we were to put this on a graph with the US, Europe, and Russia, we would see that it's still way down near the bottom of the chart. But with 1.4 billion people, just about the same as the number of people in China, and a population that is growing while China's is not, and proximity to China, as well as other attractive markets, eventually, most of us think that India's economy at some point in time, maybe 2050, will approach the same size as China's. Now that's rather interesting because what it means is that the US will not have the largest economy in the world by far. Indeed, it'll be smaller than the economies of both China and India. And depending upon how the European Union conducts itself, if the European Union is viewed as a single economy, which it probably is not quite yet, the US needs to change, and US business people need to change their frame of reference and the way of thinking about competition in international markets. Here is another measure, and this will make you feel better. This is GDP per capita. And you can see the blue line again is China. And GDP per capita is an indicator of consumption potential. So the lines at the top, the orange line is the US. So here in the US, there's greater consumption potential than in China. You and I can buy more for ourselves than residents of China, generally speaking. So whereas the size of China's economy is larger than the US economy, the wealth of people in this country is greater than the wealth of people in China. And here we see the same thing when we compare the US in orange to the European Union. And again, just take a look at the difference of in the case of the European Union, up to what appears to be something on the order of perhaps $45,000 US. The US GDP per capita about 65. Now let's go back, whoops, and take a look at, I'll get there yet, at India. And we see that even though it's moving ahead at a breakneck pace, India's rate per capita is only about $12,000. So compared to those others, India still has a long way to go. Here is the US versus the European Union. I guess we already looked at that. So now let's talk about methods for analyzing an industry. There are three dimensions that we have to look at when we look at the external environment: the economy, the industry, and the market, or markets, depending on how many we serve. And for that matter, if we're working with a company that has divisions in several industries, then we need to look also at the individual industries. And we've got some very good tools for doing that. Porter's 5 Forces, which tells us what the profit potential of an industry and the firms in the industry are, not what the profit will be, but what the potential for profitability is. Porter's Diamond, which tells you about the growth potential of a particular industry in a particular economy. The Cage analysis given to us by Pankaj Ghemawat a colleague at Harvard of Michael Porter, much younger. And CAGE stands for Culture, Administration, Geography, and Economic Differences between the home country and the country that you're looking at. Essentially, it gives us a way of looking at the threat of new entrants to an industry in Porter's five forces. Hofstede's culture model, which we'll also talk about, gives us some insight into the C in that cage analysis. Takes a little more work, but it's an interesting model, and we'll have a quick look at it. Most importantly, when we're all done with these analyses and these matrices, we need to draw conclusions about how attractive the industry is for purposes of strategic planning. So here's a diagram that simply tells us what the five forces in Porter's five forces are. The most basic and central force is rivalry, the extent to which firms are competitive against each other. And to the extent that rivalry is intense, you can imagine activities such as aggressive marketing, aggressive pricing, aggressive advertising, warranties, lots of customer service, and so forth. Now, that's the base for this model. And very often people lose sight of that. Now, the next force that we want to think about is the potential of new firms coming into the industry. If the industry is still growing and it's relatively early in its life cycle, there's a good chance if the industry is growing that other firms will want to get in. And sometimes we can even see large corporations getting divisions and business units ready to enter an industry. So sometimes the risk of entry is obvious or nearly obvious or highly likely. Other times it makes no sense because the industry is very late in its life cycle, it's mature, and there's not a lot of room for new firms to come into the industry. But if they do, if new firms come into the industry, what's that going to do to supply-demand balances? It's going to increase supply relative to demand at the particular instant when a new firm enters the industry. And so the likelihood is that prices will go down. If prices go down, that makes it harder to make a profit, right? By the way, if rivalry is intensive, either prices will go down because the market is more competitive, or costs will go up because firms in the industry have to offer better products with better quality in order to differentiate themselves from their rivals. So in both of these cases, we've got pressures pushing profit down, don't we? Now, it may also be that our customers, called buyers in this model, have the opportunity to buy from more than one supplier. So if an industry is made up of lots of competitors that are easily accessible by customers, then the customers have what's called switching power. And if customers have switching power, they have a bargaining advantage, whether they know it or not. And the way in which firms in our industry have to deal with that power is by offering more quality or lower price. So again, profit is being pressed downward. If our suppliers, maybe there are only a couple suppliers of an essential ingredient in the products that we make, but there are 6 or 8 companies in our industry. So the 6 or 8 companies in our industry are buying raw material or key components from just 2 suppliers. This, by the way, can happen in the electronics industry. In that case, who has the power? It's the supplier, isn't it? And so if supplier power goes up, the cost of firms in our industry goes up and our profit potential goes down. And finally, substitutes. Substitutes are products in other industries that can provide the same benefits to the customer as our product can. So I suppose, the tea versus coffee versus soft drinks versus beer, or bottled water. And you can think of lots of industries that actually have competitors in other industries. When that happens, you've got a rather interesting situation. If the other industry's product provides benefits just like ours, or perhaps even better, the one thing we cannot do is place a price on our product or service higher than the substitute. So the substitute actually puts a limit on our pricing. And that is a suppressor of profit potential. So all 5 of these forces suppress profit potential of an industry and therefore the firms in an industry. So we need to assess those forces and make some decisions about the attractiveness of an industry, for instance, if we're thinking about getting into it. Alternatively, if we're already in the industry, then we need to measure these forces anyway, because if the forces are high, if a force is high, we need to form a strategy to neutralize that force or overcome it. So here's a way that one team presented the results of its analysis. You can see it's a very simple bullet chart. Here's another way to do it, in this case with a horizontal bar chart that makes things really stand out. This was done for the Mexican cement company, Cemex, which became a worldwide powerhouse in the cement industry for several years as it grew with one acquisition after another, until it made a very unfortunate acquisition in Australia, right at the time when the construction industry cratered, and that really reversed Cemex's fortunes. This is another way to present the results of a 5 forces analysis. And you can see here that we're comparing each of these forces in different countries and finding out where a particular industry is more or less profitable in various countries. And as it turns out, the 5 forces were highest in the US and China. As I recall, this was also Cemex. And you can see they were lowest in Mexico, so that pretty well tells the story. So profit potential was pretty high there, as it was in Brazil and Spain because of the language. Here's another model developed by Michael Porter. And the purpose of this model is to identify whether an economy is conducive to a particular industry, that an economy can support the growth and prosperity of a particular industry. And there are four factors in this model. Factor conditions, that is the recipe for making the product or service that an industry offers. The relative demand for that product or service in a particular country. Whether there are other industries that that comprise clusters along with the industry that our firm is in, so that a complete package of excellent products or services is available. And finally, the extent of rivalry in this industry. If we get strong loadings on all of these factors, then it's not like Porter's five forces. In Porter's five forces, we'd like to get low loadings, right? We'd like the forces not to be strong, pushing profit down. In this particular case, Porter's National Diamond, these factors propel or support the growth and prosperity of an industry. So we would like these factors to be pretty strong, with the exception of one, and that's rivalry. And it behaves differently than rivalry does in the five forces. And we'll get to that in just a minute. So here's a way of expressing the results of Porter's diamond. And again, we can do this. Its purpose is to analyze the growth potential and the potential health or vitality of an industry in a particular country. And we can see now that the US and China look pretty good. Brazil doesn't look very good at all. Mexico is not a whole lot better, and nor is India. Here's the issue about rivalry that I mentioned earlier. Down at on the bottom of this slide, you can see that as rivalry goes up, the profit potential, in this case, return on investment, goes down. And with my students over the years, we have taken a look at various industries and public disclosures and industry studies, and they really work well. As the rivalry goes up, yep, profit goes down and return on investment goes down. That's a real chart, and I know so because I've seen it in real life over and over again. On the other hand, we have the role of rivalry in Porter's National Diamond. Here we have a different story. When there's no rivalry, we essentially have a monopoly. And monopolists aren't under a lot of pressure to improve their product or service or raise their game. They've got a good deal, but the customer doesn't. As rivalry picks up, things change, don't they? And the growth potential of the industry and the industry's quality, the state of the art, goes up. But at some point, if rivalry gets too high, if it goes past the midpoint in this chart, what's happening is that companies are taking measures, short-term measures, making compromises, perhaps in quality, in order to maintain their market share or their profitability. Until at the far end, when rivalry is a 5 on this scale, what you have is dogs in the street fighting over a scrap of meat. There's certainly no long-range planning going on. So moderate rivalry in Porter's National Diamond is most conducive to an industry's growth and prosperity. So you have to be a little careful the way you analyze rivalry when you're looking at Porter's National Diamond. Okay, now back to the 5 forces. Let me see if I can get that up here real quick. You can see that we have a threat of new entrants here. how could we analyze the threat of new entrants? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here we are. Pankaj Gemawat's cage analysis, culture, administrative, geographic, and economic difference between the home country where your company is located and the country where you want to offer your product or service. And differences between your country's culture and the target country's culture can really make a difference in how you have to offer your product or service. And it's going to make it a little more difficult for firms from your country to get into that target country. The same is true of administrative barriers such as imports and government regulations and codes and what have you. I wish I had more time to talk about this, especially in India, where there are more difficulties getting into India than you can imagine. But suffice to say that Gemawat got it right. There are numerous administrative barriers to entering a country that can exist. Geographic difference is not just the difference itself, but the impact of that difference. So this exhibit was done by an analysis of Schindler Elevator Company by a team. And a new elevator was developed by Schindler for Southeast Asia. And it's because elevators cannot be constructed in India the way they are in Europe. Schindler was located in Switzerland. And the roadways in India are really rough. So if you were to build an elevator in a city in India and ship that elevator as a metal box to a building project in another city, by the time that elevator got there, it would probably be scrap metal. The roads are just so rough. So a new kind of elevator was developed. The Schindler developed the skills of sheet metal workers and fabricators in local markets, sent their people in to coach the installing engineers or provided the installation teams themselves, but developed a new kind of elevator that could be fabricated locally rather than centrally. Well, there are lots of other problems that can occur due to geography, not least of which is perishability of food products that are grown in one part of the world and shipped to the United States. We have refrigerated containers that can fly on airplanes as well as ride on trucks for that reason. And finally, economic differences are pretty easy to understand. Some economies simply have higher GDP per capita, higher spending potentials than other countries. Nevertheless, those economies may be growing. So there's a company in India, Tata Motors, that produces a car called the Nano. The Nano is a very small car, and its list price is about $3,000. So, just imagine trying to buy a car in the United States for $3,000, a new car. You can appreciate that Tata is doing something different than the big car manufacturers in the United States and China. Nevertheless, Tata is going to China, and it's going to other developing countries where folks don't have the spending power, the ability to consume like they do in Western Europe and the United States. And there's a great demand for transportation, but not the expensive transportation we have. And for that reason, Tata's Nano is pretty well received. So here, the effect of economic difference between the home country and the target country can make a huge difference. So based on those factors, we can come up to Porter's 5 forces and evaluate the threat of new entrants. Okay, now, how do we get this culture thing? First, well, just bear in mind that it would be nice if we could sort of pin down culture a little more specifically, because unlike these other items that are pretty clear cut, culture is not the most clear cut frame of reference that we could have. And if we had a device to assess culture, that would be helpful. And we'll get to that in just a minute. But here's how we would take a look at the cage analysis. And again, what we saw in this analysis is that the barriers to entry into India and China were really high. They were really low in Mexico. And since this analysis was for CMEX, my question to this team is, how the heck did they get any kind of a reading at all on geography and economic differences? But be that, I should probably have changed these so that they were all zeros. And maybe that's what I'll do. Yeah, let me do that right now. We'll just fix that baby right here. The problem is that you can see up at the top of the chart, reference country, in this case Mexico, because that's where CMEX was headquartered. Normally, we do not include the reference country on the table because we know that what we're trying to measure is the difference in these forces versus the reference country. And the folks who made this chart just didn't quite get that idea. Okay, so this takes us now to the question of cultural differences. You know, we'd like to be able to pin down this culture. And fortunately, we've got a wonderful resource to do that. And it's called the Hofstede Institute. And you can see Hofstede down here. Hofstede was an anthropologist, sociologist at IBM. And he did a study of, oh my golly, I don't recall, 300 or 400 business units in IBM, but a very large study. And he measured 4 dimensions of culture. You can see them up at the top of the screen: power distance, uncertainty difference, individualism, and masculinity versus femininity. In the case of individualism, it's individualism versus collectivism. Later on, and by the way, Hofstede was so successful that an institute was formed called the Hofstede Institute. And the institute, with Hofstede's direction, I guess he was still there then, developed another dimension called long-term orientation. And since then, there's been another one called indulgence. But the basic 4 are the first 4 on this slide. Now, if you were to go to the Hofstede Institute, you would find perhaps an updated version of this chart. And you could get very good recent information about the strength of these forces, these cultural forces in countries throughout the world. So this is a very valuable resource. Why is it so valuable? Well, let's take a look at China. First of all, let's take a look at individualism. Individualism is rated a 20, meaning collectivism is an 80. It's this is a society that does things together, and yet when it comes to avoiding uncertainty, that is the attempt to avoid taking risk, the score is also low. And it's very unusual for a country to be collectivist and aggressive in its risk-taking behavior. Moreover, consistent with this collectivist attitude, the power distance feature of China is high. Power distance is a measure of status. In power distance, somebody at a higher level of society cannot be approached by somebody from a lower level without that lower person, taking a big chance of getting slapped down. There's a status, an order of society, and the Chinese in their propaganda would not want you to know this, but there is in fact quite a lot of status sensitivity in China. So here again, that's sort of a conservative attitude. And yet, surprisingly, China as a country, meaning it, and you can think about China's political, global political, international political behavior. China is willing to step out and of line and do something unexpected, even though it has the appearance of being a very orderly society when it comes to taking risk, to moving in across out of the box, as it were. The Chinese are more than other countries willing to do that. And a lot of folks just, when they go to China to do business, they just never think of that possibility for good reason. Yet there it is. Well, we can see some other interesting factors. The United States, as you can see, prides itself in being ruggedly individualistic and having a high score on individualism. My own opinion is that that's been changing. And by the way, when we take a look at the difference between, if we look at the Latin American countries, we tend to see pretty low levels of individualistic behavior. And yet in the US, Australia, the United Kingdom, Canada, the Anglo countries, as it were, the Anglo-Saxon countries, much more willing to take individual responsibility. That can give you tremendous insight into how to do marketing, how to conduct yourself in the management of a factory in another country, and so forth. There's a lot of wisdom in this system, just a lot. And by the way, if you haven't noticed, Japan over here, that's the next thing I'll talk about. Masculinity versus femininity is not what it seems to be. This is not about gender. And even in textbooks, I find this misunderstood. Hastede had a metaphor here. Masculinity is his reference to acquisitiveness and aggressiveness, the desire to have and own stuff, okay, to get stuff and be aggressive. Whereas femininity is his way of referring to an organization's desire to keep the family together, just like mom, okay? So if somebody gets out of line where power distance is high, and collectivism might be high, they'd slap that person down and just, make him get on the line because he'd be miserable until otherwise. But if you're in a feminine society, that's not what happens. The society is motivated to keep its members in the fold. If somebody strays, they try to bring that person back into the fold. There's a motive to keep everybody together, and it's there's a strong desire to hold the family, to hold the firm together, to keep everybody happy, maybe, but on the same page. That's femininity. As it turns out, Russia, which is not on this chart, is high in feminism. I visited Russia, and I was very careful not to refer to Hofstede when I was in Russia, because you can imagine sitting around with a bunch of Russian guys telling them that their society is feminine. And I bet you I'd get slapped down. So you don't call a bunch of guys in Russia feminine, but they do, they are motivated to keep their organization intact, organizational integrity, family integrity. That's what femininity is. And so Russia, in Hofstede's framework, is a feminine society. Be careful how you use that term when you're in Russia, and you'll be okay. By the way, long-term orientation, if you're at all interested, you can see that China scores very, very high. So China is not nearly as interested in this quarter's results as managers of US corporations are. They are the long-range planners. Same for Japan. And then you get down here to the United States, and what are the US managers interested in? This quarter's results, this quarter's earnings release, right? US is not real keen on long-range planning. We say we are, but if you want to get into long-range planning, go to China. Nevertheless, I continue to practice it and try to encourage people and businesses in the U.S. to do long-range planning, but it's a harder slog in the U.S. than it is in China. In China, they take it for granted, and here you got to be a real silver-tongued fox to get people to agree to do long-range planning. Okay, so this takes us then, we've done economic and industry analysis, so we'll now do market analysis. And the IMF database that we talked about earlier has this wonderful database. By the way, the forecast has been changed to 2025 now. As it turns out, I looked at this just last night, and remarkable, from 1980 it begins. So it's just a tremendously valuable database. And it'll give you also inflation rates, just a whole variety of variables. But for sure you can get population. What you can't get is population by age group. And very often, for instance, when we were looking at PepsiCo, teenagers and young adults tend to consume a lot of carbonated beverages, but older people don't. So you would be more inclined to focus in on age groups. And for that, you need to go to the US Department of Census is one possibility. And you need to look for age group population in other countries. For instance, in Japan, seniors are a much larger proportion of the population even than in the United States. It has the largest portion of senior citizens of any major country. That can really influence a firm's marketing strategy. Another thing we obviously want to do is take a look at the sales trends of products that are made by the company we're studying. So in the case of Tesla, I guess, there are sales trends in the Tesla case in the back of our current textbook, as there are for products made by other companies that are the topics of cases in that textbook. You can also use Google to find, and it's just remarkable, if you, for instance, go into Google and just enter auto sales trends, you're on your Google page, if you scroll down just a little bit, you'll see some graphs. If you click on it, your entire screen will be filled with graphs. And if you click on the panel graphs on the right side of the screen, you can actually get the document where those graphs occurred for explanations and even more graphs. But product and service sales trends are definitely not hard to come by, and you really need to get them if you're going to do an analysis of a company's strategic situation. So this happens to be a graph showing trends of population at the top of China, immediately below it, India. Because of the one-child policy that has been terminated, but the Chinese population is flattening and will eventually come back down. I've been in China, and what amazed me was how the young people are delighted to have one child, and they spoil their children, but they just want to have one. And that's because the young people are so busy going out making money. This is a very busy youth population in China, and they kind of like, you know, what they're getting, and they want to get more of it, and so they virtually don't have time for making kids. The Indians haven't figured that out yet, and so their fertility rate is still above the replacement rate. It's come down a great deal. In India, the fertility rate not long ago was 3.5 children per family. Today, it's about 2.5. The replacement rate is 2.1. And so the population continues to grow in India. But the fertility rate in China, I don't recall the specific number, but it's significantly less than 2. So also is the fertility rate or the birth rate in the United States. So the way the U.S. deals with that problem is immigration, and as you know, that is a political issue. But if the U.S. wants a population that continues to grow so that the economy can keep growing, then immigration is going to have to continue to be part of the equation. Anyway, you can see the population then of Russia and Mexico and the United States. And you can see that US is down there at the top of the lower group at less than 400, about currently, I think, something on the order of 330 million, something like that. Okay, so, but population and age group population, very important for market analysis. Um, Here's an illustration of a chart that I took from a team that was studying Tesla and the market for electric cars and the trend in consumption of electric cars in different countries. The purpose here is simply to suggest to you that there are a variety of ways of tracking sales trends of the product that you're interested in. Okay, so at this point, what we should have is a set of conclusions about the external environment. I did not put a slide here that says that, although I probably should have, but there are so many slides already, I just decided to leave that one out. But this takes us to the assessment of internal capabilities. We've looked at the external environment. Now we look at the internal environment. And we start out with financial trends. And the good thing in our cases is that financial trends are provided in those cases rather extensively. Also, in most of my classes, I provide some more detailed financial trend data and forecasts to strengthen the analysis of financial trends. Because this video will be looked at by more than one course, I'm not going to get into the details, but I do provide supplemental information. Something else that these cases go into are functional strengths and weaknesses. However, I expect the teams that do these studies to gather information, to do a little research and read about how these companies are performing, what they're doing well and what they're not doing well, and to make bullet charts of companies' functional strengths and weaknesses. So here's how the financial trends should be represented. You can see that these go to 2016. So I pulled these from a case that was done, several years ago. But you can see that we track sales, operating profit margin, return on investment, return on equity, long-term debt, shareholders' equity, and if we combine long-term debt and shareholders' equity, and I might add short-term debt too, we get invested capital. Invested capital is essentially the sum of funded debt and equity. So what portion of that total does long-term debt represent? And that's the leverage ratio. And you can see in this particular case that the leverage ratio really shot up. What's the reason for, and you can see the reason for that is long-term debt shot up. Equity actually went down in this case, kind of a strange situation. But the debt went up because the company made a couple large acquisitions. And with interest rates coming down the way they were then, those were good decisions to go ahead and take advantage of the availability of borrowing when the cost of borrowing was declining, and therefore interest expenses would not be prohibitive. That was the rationale for these decisions. Incidentally, and I think that was FedEx, but here you can see that the folks who did this analysis wanted to make it clear that something had really happened with FedEx's leverage. It was 11%, that is long-term debt, as a portion of total invested capital was 11% back in 2006 and had risen to 50% in 2016. Leverage is a measure of financial risk. And generally speaking, if we have extreme financial risk, and we're approaching that here, but not to the point where it's life-threatening. But if this pie chart reversed so that in 2006, 11% of capital were equity and 89% were debt, that would be extreme financial risk. When financial risk is extreme like that, and our risk is not extreme, maybe it's more like FedEx in 2006, where we don't have a lot of leverage. We don't have a lot of long-term debt compared to equity. We've got a nice, comfortable financial cushion, plenty of reserves in our financial basket. Then we can be aggressive, and we can take aggressive moves against a company that has very high financial risk. So if you've got a rival with 85 or 90% leverage, that is, most of their invested capital has come from borrowed money, and very little of yours has, you can whack them. You can do things. You can be aggressive in the marketplace. You can maybe launch a new product in a market that your rival would like to defend, but they can't because they're just suffocating with debt. So whenever you see a rival that's got really high leverage and you don't have really high leverage, that's an invitation to go kick them. And so many times when I advised clients and we found that our leverage was low and our rivals' leverage was high, we went on the warpath. On the other hand, I advised companies that had high leverage, and I found that our rivals didn't. And boy, that I blew the whistle, and just all sorts of things have to be done to try to correct that situation. So the pie charts like these can, they're pretty simple, but they really can tell a story. Okay, another way to look at the condition that our company is in is to take a look at what's called the BCG matrix. Most of you have already heard of it because it's just so popular, but essentially we're trying to take a look at our market position, our market share. And is it high or not? By the way, I see a little problem here that I'm going to try to fix if I can. No, I cannot. Huh. Let's see, that's correct, but I can't get this dog thing. Can I? I can. Only, let's see. I just have to get it up. Okay. I guess that'll have to do for now. But something's obviously, oh, you know what I could do? I could bring this down here. There we go. So that's a little bit better looking anyway. Sorry about that. Let me make this stay. You're familiar with these terms about the whoops, market growth is low. I got the thing in the wrong place. Unfortunately, this isn't going to show up. Low market growth low. Yeah, okay, we had it in the right place. So, um, pardon me for that interruption. The BCG matrix is based upon the industry life cycle. And so it actually starts in this quadrant here with ventures, where market growth is high, but our market share is low. I might add that very often the high share is on the left and the low share is on the right. I picked this slide off from a team's study and did not realize that they had the positions reversed. No matter, you know, this works just as well. But early in an industry's life cycle, the industry is just getting started. Usually nobody has a real high market share if we even know what the market size is and therefore what the market share is. For that reason, lots of companies haven't entered the industry yet. So if you have a business that is getting started in the early stages of an industry's development, and you don't have a large share of it yet, and maybe the industry is growing, but you don't have a large share. So you invest in businesses like that in the hope that some of them will move their way over to a higher market share because you invest in them. And then you have a fast growth market and your company in that market with a high market share because you've done some things right is likely to produce good profit, good earnings. Unfortunately, even though it's producing good earnings, because it's growing fast, its profit will have to be reinvested in that business to build more inventory, to build more depots, or to develop more distribution, physical distribution. And so, although the company is profitable, it doesn't necessarily generate free cash flow. Now, in time, what will happen is that the market will grow mature, and it won't grow so fast. And so eventually, this business, and indeed FedEx Express has moved down to this category, or it certainly has gone in that direction. TNT is still growing nicely. So as this business comes down here, if it doesn't have to grow as much, then its profit can become free. It won't be needed to reinvest in the business. And that free cash flow can be siphoned over into the ventures and the stars. Sometimes the stars need new business, but these businesses are called cash cows. And we can't see it here because we don't have the label, but you've heard the term cash cow. And this is a company that is late in the business cycle. The industry is mature. The business has a high market share, and for that reason, probably has a high profit margin. But the profit it generates turns into cash that is available to be used anywhere management wants to use it. And usually that cash finds its way over here to the ventures category. Whenever we have a venture that doesn't pan out, it becomes a dog. And if you've got a low share of a low market, then that business is a candidate to be divested or wound down or liquidated or sold to someone else. As it turns out, Kinko's original founders were smarter than FedEx managers, and Kinko's realized that it had certain limits, and it sold the business to FedEx, and FedEx probably would have preferred not to have purchased Kinko's, but it did. So this is a great way to assess the strengths and weaknesses of a company's various divisions. Eventually, we need to make some conclusions about strengths and weaknesses. Where do we find the competitively strong parts of our business? Where do we find weaknesses? And based on that, we're then ready to make some conclusions. So we've gathered the evidence about the external environment and internal capabilities. So we start out by simply doing an assessment. So what is our strategic assessment? Where is our market position strong or weak? Where are our capabilities strong or weak? And depending upon the combination of those two factors, that is to say, the external environment and internal capabilities, we can rationalize as prescribed in this chart. And it's basically this is what strategic planning is all about: rationalizing internal capabilities to the external environment, finding out where we have the capability to exploit favorable market conditions or industry conditions or economic conditions, and because of our capabilities. Or after we do the situation assessment, realizing that we need to make some changes. We have to build more capabilities in a particular area, but ideally we'll have strong capabilities in a strong market position, and that's where we want to exploit our leadership or potential leadership. We may even be able to set industry standards because we're a leader. We'll invest in businesses like this to develop new products, to develop new markets, and so forth. And you can then read the prescriptions in the other quadrants of this diagram, but this is the most general, generic strategic planning matrix there is. This is just as, and I might add that this one is similar to a couple others, but not exactly the same. So I'm going to claim ownership to this matrix myself. This is that BCG matrix again, but now we're using it to make some decisions. Remember, we're going to take our cash cows, the cash from the cash cows. We're going to plan to invest in ventures. Those venture, and by the way, you can see we've got the low and the high in the right positions now. It's we've taken this one and we've simply in this case, we've used the BCG matrix for diagnostic purposes. Now we're going to use it for formative purposes and make some decisions about strategy. And of course, the most basic of all is we're going to take the cash from the cash cow. We're going to invest in the ventures, which hopefully will turn into stars, but over time they'll become cash cows. And this process, if we're good strategic planners, will just keep going on. I call it a cash pump, and it's a beautiful thing to behold when it works right. But that it doesn't always work right. But not all ventures become stars. Some you just can't hit bat 100. You know, you're not going to have winners for every one of your ventures. Whether it's a brand new product you developed internally, or a little company that you, or a product line that you acquired. Ideally, if you acquired it, you knew that it had great potential. But either way, just like Kinko's, it can become a dog. And in that case, you've got to make some decisions just what you're going to do. One of the things you can do, if you go back up to this matrix here, is you can invest in strengthening or extending its market position. You could redeploy its resources in more favorable markets, or sell the business to a stronger market participant, or somebody who isn't as smart as you are. And that's what Kinko's owners did when they sold Kinko's to FedEx. So there we go. This is the BCG matrix. It is a basic strategic planning framework, and it is used very often. So off we go to the next one. This is what we use when we don't know, may not know the industry's growth rate, but maybe we're in an industry where there are a lot of small companies that don't trade stock, and we just can't get a lot of information about market share. So what do? And the answer is that we can use the GE multi-factor matrix. And I borrowed this from a website, so I can't change the title, but it's not the GE matrix, it's the GE multi-factor matrix, or the GE McKinsey matrix. It was devised by a team of strategic planners at GE with the assistance of consultants from the firm McKinsey & Company. So the proper name is the GE McKinsey multi-factor matrix. And what's neat about it is that you have such flexibility in its use. So industry attractiveness. We've talked about lots of ways to make, to decide whether an industry is attractive. Can you think of one? I hope you said Porter's 5 forces, right? So if Porter's 5 forces are low, this industry has a high profit potential. If you think back about some of those other matrices that we have looked at now, you can apply those as well. On the other hand, you may simply know about certain characteristics of the industry. Maybe it's focused on Europe and you've got good business in Europe. Maybe it's got it has requirements, or its basic functions employ a certain technology that your firm has in abundance, or that you're very proficient in. So the industry is attractive for a variety, could be attractive for a variety of reasons. It could be because of its growth potential. Could be because it's growing rapidly right now. It could be because it's just a very profitable industry. Medical products, for instance, are a lot more profitable than a lot of food products. So, you know, you've got to invest more in research and development, but if you're successful, you can get a higher profit margin. So there are a lot of different ways to look at industry attractiveness. Similarly, you can look at business strength or competitive position in a lot of different ways. Just like in the BCG matrix, you may look at market share. On the other hand, if you don't know market share, it could be that you know that your firm is a leader in technology, or that your firm has great business strength in a particular kind of manufacturing that is characteristic of this industry. So you've got a lot more ways to use the GE McKinsey multi-factor matrix. And I'm going to change the title of this slide because it makes me nervous leaving it like that. Anyway, you can see that the circle size represents the size of the industry, and that the green wedge represents your market share. Now, that's an outgrowth of the original version of this matrix and was added later, but it's a nice touch. So you can put on this matrix a graphic representation of your business, or perhaps you're doing this for product lines and you're comparing your product to the products of competitors. Or perhaps you're looking at just all the different products that your company offers. So there are a lot of ways to use the GE matrix, GE McKinsey multi-factor matrix. Sometimes you just have to use it because you cannot use this one because you don't know the market share and or the industry's growth rate. Okay, once we've gathered the evidence, it's time now to rationalize it, to make some decisions about what success is going to look like for your company. And the first thing we need to recognize is that some companies are in better condition than others. So if your company is one of those that has high leverage, like those companies that we looked at earlier, to talk about long-term growth or even high market share is sort of silly. What you're going to look at is a more acceptable level of risk. You've got to get leverage down. Another kind of risk is product line obsolescence. I remember working with a company way back in the Vietnam War shortly afterwards, and an airplane called the Helio Courier was developed to fly over a location in Vietnam and feather its engines, its propellers, so it could, even though it's flying like a regular airplane, it could hover like a helicopter, take a picture, identify, some bad guys, and then take off again before the bad guys could start to shoot at you. It was a reconnaissance airplane. It was a cute little airplane. The Army loved it and gladly bought as many as they could get. In the development of this airplane, there was a lot of engineering and research expense, and it was capitalized. And then for every airplane that was sold, a certain part of that research and development was amortized as part of the cost of the airplane. And so the price of the airplane included the cost of the material in the airplane, the cost to assemble it, and a piece of that research and development cost, as well as a profit margin. And the very last Helio Courier that was sold as a profit. Unfortunately, the war ended, and only about 30% of that research and development cost had been amortized. And it was a little company that developed the Helio Courier. As a result, when the war ended, so did that company, because it had to write off the unamortized research and development expense. So you can have risk for reasons more than just high leverage. There can be a lot of reasons that make a company's risk unacceptable. When you're at that level, you may think about the other levels on the hierarchy, but your highest priority is going to be to get more acceptable risk. If your risk is acceptable, the next level to place high priority on is gaining superior financial results. Does that mean you forget about your competitive position or trying to get favorable market position? No, it doesn't. But this does say that your highest priority, if your financial results aren't very good yet, is to get them good, because if you don't have good financial results and you launch an aggressive marketing program, you may run out of money, in which case you're going to have a problem, sort of like Helio Courier. But if your financial results are good, now you can try to, capture that dominant market position and a high market share. What happens if, when you're doing that, you have a bad quarter, you slip, and your financial results get poor again? Then you have to drop back down to that lower level and stay at that level until your results are favorable again. Then you can move back up to the next level where you're seeking and placing higher priority on another set of goals. If you've got everything except long-term growth, you could have quite a problem, because that may mean that your industry is near the end of its life cycle. And it could be that if you don't have any more, if you can't get any more of a favorable market position, if you can't grow your market share, if you can't grow sales significantly, then you do have a real problem, and you have to take a look at long-term growth. Yes, you continue to pay attention to your market position. Yes, you sure continue to pay attention to your financial results. But now you've got a serious issue to look at, and that is what you're going to do for an encore, what you're going to do in the future. So we have priorities, okay? The purpose of the goals hierarchy is to identify your strategic planning priorities, particularly the priority that you will place on alternative goals. Here's how financial results were done by that team that I showed you earlier. It may be another team. I see this one's gone up to 2019. The other PepsiCo slides we looked at were at 2016, so this is probably another PepsiCo team. But you can see that PepsiCo's sales had been sort of flat. They actually declined. It's because they have a big division in Russia, which has been under sanctions from the US, and some other reasons, China not the least of them. And so PepsiCo's had to been thinking about how to get back on the grow. And you can see that this graph indicates what the team thought PepsiCo's growth goals insofar as sales were. And they're pretty aggressive if you take a look at the y-axis. Here we have the ways in which operating margin, return on investment, return on equity, and leverage goals are represented. And you can see that there's a really important one, and that is the reduction of leverage. PepsiCo let its leverage get really high in order to make some acquisitions, and now they're in the process of bringing that leverage down. As a result, the return on invested capital with the same operating margin, if invested capital goes down because debt goes down relative to equity anyway, we can see return on invested capital going up. Return on equity is a nice juicy number. As a matter of fact, it's artificially high because equity was reduced very sharply. But the return on equity that PepsiCo has is probably not going to be maintained at the high level that you see on this chart, because it's just a very high level. Okay, so, whoops, I must have hit the wrong button. Boy, I sure did. I hit the go down to the bottom button. There we are. Okay. Um, Here's the way that we summarize the financial results. I don't know whether this little picture is in the way, so I'll get it out. But this is a table that we usually use to characterize changes in our vital financial results um, between our most recent results, the estimate for the current year, and the goal. And you can see the difference between the actual results and the goal is 5 years. Companies often make 5-year plans, and so that's what you'll see here. And we can put the amount of change and in percentages. We don't take a percent of a percent. We just indicate the change in percentage points. When we have a change in dollars or units produced, volumes, when there are aggregate changes, then we can express the percentage change as well as the amount. So this is how we represent the goals. In this particular case, I just copied these folks' slide to acknowledge that they had set goals other than financial goals. And they could have been more precise here. And here they are, in fact. So, and these were for PepsiCo. And these were the suggestions that this team made for PepsiCo's non-financial goals. Whether they're justifiable or not is not the point, but rather simply to show that you can have goals that are not financial in nature. At the end of the day, what we need to do to get into strategy is to talk about the objectives of strategy itself. So do we have the intent to get costs down across the board? Do we intend to get costs down in a particular market segment? Do we intend to make better products, higher quality, different, innovative products that can be offered to the entire market around the world? Or do we intend to offer a differentiated product for particular market segments? This again is a framework of alternative objectives that is provided to us by the famous Michael Porter. So at this point, the team stated what PepsiCo's generic strategic objectives were based upon its assessment of the generic strategic situation. They spelled out what the specific generic objectives of strategy are. And those objectives will probably include using the financial information to build a momentum or baseline forecast of what will happen to the company if strategy does not change, and placing on the same graph the goal. And the goal isn't always 10 years. The planning period depends upon the industry and the company itself. But normally, if strategy does not change, which is what the momentum forecast is meant to represent, this is a forecast that shows what will happen if strategy does not change. And over time, because markets change, you can expect that the momentum forecast will decline. So it looks like this company has to come up with a strategy that will be valued at $130 million, right? They want to go from 100 to 200, but they also have to offset a decline of 30. So they have to come up with programs that are worth 130. How are they going to do that? Well, they're going to spell out programs or projects, and depending upon whether this is profit or sales or production volumes, whatever it might be, the idea is to prepare projects and programs that have estimated benefits equal in total to this gap. So this gap is the objective of strategy for sales or for profit and so forth. It's the strategic objective. And the objectives of these programs and projects, when totaled up, have to equal the strategic objective. Not only that, I almost always ask companies to plan for more than the strategic objective because we need to allow for human error and people make mistakes. And it may not be that all these programs are going to be implemented successfully. So to fill that gap, I'm going to ask management to come up with plans that have a value greater than the strategic objective so that we know that when we allow for human error, we're still probably going to be successful. Okay. Now, what happens if you can't fill the gap? That's an interesting question. And the answer is that you may have to seek joint ventures or alliances. May even be that you'll have to sell the company. If your forecasts are accurate, you can reduce the goal, but what you're saying is that you're trying to seek a target that no longer represents financial success. And so if you cannot find enough programs to fill the gap, you've got a second problem, and it can be a very serious one. All right, we have our goals and strategic objectives. How will we fill? And we've got ideas about programs. Here are some ways that we can select programs and activities just by doing more analysis. This is called the directional policy matrix. In this case, what we're doing is saying, what are our capabilities today? What could they be in the future? What is our market today? What could it be in the future? And you can see that the stars represent current products and the circles represent products that could be made in the future. And this again was done by one of my students who was studying the Echo Shoe Company, a famous maker of golf shoes. Another thing you could do is develop new capabilities. This matrix was given to us by a couple of guys named Gary Hamel at the London Business School, and C.K. Prahalad, who is no longer with us, but was at the University of Michigan. And you can see that, again, what we're asking is not only is where is the industry today, but where do we think it's going to be in the future? And what kind of competences do we have today? What competences might we need in the future? And depending upon which of these combinations you're dealing with, you're going to need to develop new kinds of competences. So in the analysis of, oh my, the Japanese car company, it's terrible. I'm sorry, I can't think of it, and it's a common name. Anyway, that's the company that developed the first hybrid car, And so the 10 years before that car was announced, the company started to develop capabilities to produce a car transmission system that was powered by an electric battery as well as an internal combustion engine. And so developing new competences for an existing industry, these authors called Premier Plus 10. And it took Toyota, God, it took Toyota fully 10 years to develop the capabilities to produce what became the Prius, which was a very successful hybrid car. I might add that General Motors also was working very hard to produce a new all-electric battery-powered car in competition with Tesla. So there's a lot of strategy going on in that cell in the automotive industry. Filling in the blanks is what we try to do every day. We try to develop our current capabilities to deal in our current industry and just get better at it. We can take our existing capabilities and try to move them into a new industry or a new segment of the market that we're already serving. But usually it's a new industry, one that's very similar to ours, that needs the same kind of equipment to manufacture as we have, or produces a product that is not very different from the one we already make. However, there may come a time when we find an opportunity to develop new capabilities in order to make product for a new market. It really does happen. And I think that PepsiCo has probably demonstrated that as much as anything. You know, they were originally in soft drinks, then they added carbonated beverages. In Russia, PepsiCo produces dairy products, and those dairy products at some point may be brought into Europe or even the US. So it certainly is possible to develop new products, new competences for new industries, but it's to do that, you have to take advantage of the relationship, the similarity of competences that you already have to those that are required in another industry. I think for planning purposes, this one here where Toyota developed the Prius, that's the one that usually gathers the most attention. Igor Antsov was a physicist of all things in Russia, and after the war, he was brought to the United States, first to Europe and then the United States. He eventually joined an aircraft company, became very fascinated by long-range planning, and before it was all done, he was the first dean of the business school at university in Kentucky. I can't think of it either, but perhaps that'll come to me as well. But Antsov is famous for his writings on corporate planning. And this is one of the matrices that he developed to assist us in setting objectives, corporate objectives. So we are asked to decide whether we want to develop products and services for our existing market or new markets, whether we want to use existing products or new products. So if we're using existing products in existing markets, we're really trying to get higher market share. It's what we do when we go to work every day. If we want to stay in our existing market, but develop new products, that's called product development. If we want to take our existing products to new markets, such as when we move from domestic to international, that's market development. And if we want to develop new products for new markets, that's kind of like that mega opportunities in what we looked at a minute ago. But again, product proliferation, new products for new markets, it certainly does happen. And again, the PepsiCo examples would be good ones. Here's another framework for looking at international markets. When we have the opportunity to serve customers in multiple countries, we need to ask some questions. Is the product or service that we offer capable of being standardized from country to country? Gasoline is a good example. Gasoline is gasoline is gasoline. Oil is oil is oil. Semiconductors are semiconductors are semiconductors. Those industries are global. They're the same everywhere. On the other hand, many industries have to be tailored to the local market. Clothing and food often have to satisfy local demands. That's called a localization or multi-domestic strategy. An international strategy looks like global. However, the international strategy simply takes the home country business model and copies it around the world. The globalization model doesn't do that, doesn't necessarily do that. For instance, petroleum is drilled in various locations around the world. It's transported to refineries through a variety of different means, pipelines, ships, trucks, and so forth. It's refined in refineries, which are located close to the markets that they serve, and then those refineries transport the refined product, again, through trucks, trains, pipelines, even ships, to their ultimate destinations. So it's like an amoeba. It's a one-celled system with lots of component parts and a single nucleus, which is the headquarters. The international strategy has lots of amoebas and there are lots of little bugs, and the bugs are identical to each other, and they go wherever they want to go in the world. The transnational strategy is a combination of local and standardized strategies. It recognizes that the business is often the same around the world in this industry, but that modifications need to be made in order to do business most effectively or be most appealing to consumers. And so some modifications are made. And as you can see in the graphic on the right, very often international becomes global, or transnational, and localization, sometimes called multinational strategies, also turn into transnational strategies. So here's a little table that simply summarizes the characteristics of multinational, global, international, and transnational strategies. And I will leave it to you to look at this chart to appreciate that the configuration the roles of overseas operations, and the way in which knowledge is acquired and disseminated differs in each one of those cases. Ultimately, we have to come down to an organization. How will we structure this company that's doing business multinationally? One way to do it is to set up divisions for each product if we make several categories of product. Another way to do it is to organize geographically and to set up divisions or subsidiaries in different parts of the world and have them sell and produce and sell all of our products. No matter which way a firm progresses, as a worldwide product division or an area division, for the reasons that we just saw on this slide, the chances are that we're going to end up becoming a global matrix where we have responsibilities for both products and geographic areas. And that means that management is going to get more complicated. When they can, businesses prefer to stay organized around products or geographic areas. And that's assuming that there's enough international business to do that. Sometimes international businesses exists in a company, but it doesn't exist in such a large amount that you need to set up separate divisions for products or geographic areas. Instead, you set up an international division and it arranges for marketing or conducts marketing activities from headquarters and does business mainly by exporting products to various parts of the world using brokers and sales agents, sometimes by setting up its own sales company in other parts of the world. Well, all right, we've now got our strategy and our organization. What we need to do is simply take action to implement these projects and programs that we talked about earlier. Whoops. And so, implementation actions. And what we are talking about here for your project is to simply identify the projects. You don't have to lay them out, their schedules or their budgets, or do the work that is usually involved in project management. Just identify their topics. But their topics need to be non-trivial. They need to be important enough to be on this slide. So it might be that you need new management. I worked with one team on Apple before Steve Jobs died. But the team that did the study realized that Apple was dependent on Steve Jobs. And so one of the key projects that they identified was the need to fill or to identify potential successors for Steve Jobs in the event that he was unable to continue. And lo and behold, virtually a year later, it was revealed that Steve Jobs indeed was sick and wasn't going to live much longer. So this team definitely had the right idea. Maybe it involves constructing a new plant, developing new products, forming a cost reduction program, forming a project to get higher market share in a particular market, or do a joint venture, or to review and replan. And you have to have a procedure for reviewing plans on a regular basis and a procedure for replanning. We're not getting into that in this lecture, and I'm sure you're glad of that because it's gone on pretty long already. Nevertheless, your method, your strategic planning method, has to have the capability to replan. So this is a way one company talked about developing the product lines for PepsiCo being either more indulgent or more nutritious. The same for PepsiCo's line of snacks, PepsiCo's Frito-Lay. And Frito-Lay was the company that I worked with at PepsiCo. But Frito-Lay dominates the snack food industry. And so this is a representation of those products. And the question is, do you want to have them more fun for you or more good for you? And just to sort of wrap things up, here are some slides taken from a recent presentation by that PepsiCo team that talks about how PepsiCo is dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. And again, I'm not going to read them, but it just seems to me that PepsiCo really set themselves apart by developing methods and procedures for taking care of its employees in this very difficult time. Now, the way I can take care of you in this very difficult time is to turn off the recorder, because if you've been sitting through this, it must be very difficult and you probably have to go to the bathroom. I certainly hope that you've put this video on hold and paused it long enough to go to the bathroom and take a break and do something else. But if you've gotten through it, you now have a pretty good understanding of what's done in strategic planning, and you have the ability now to undertake those activities that are involved in strategic planning. And your challenge is to do these things that I've described for the company that you have been assigned or that you have chosen to study in my course. And you can use each one of these devices that I've gone over to prepare your plan. You may not, and you probably won't need to use all of them. And there certainly are other devices that you can use and websites that you can go to when you're looking at the market, particularly the markets in the economy. So with that, I'll let you get to work. Thank you for your patience in looking at this very long video. Goodbye.